Florida Live, Dan Maduri, AM 820 News, your conversation station, Super Tuesday. And joining us right now, author Peter Kiernan, one of the only people that I know that has been asked to run for office by both Democrats and the GOP. Peter, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine today. How are you?
Doing well, doing well. So, you're sitting there watching this on Super Tuesday. When you look at Trump, are his chances really valid at this point in time from a standpoint of the GOP will let this happen, or are we looking at a brokered convention down the road?
I think it's very early to say whether there'll be a brokered convention, but I will say this, that if you just look at the math, if he does what he's expected to do, Trump does what he's expected to do today, what happens is that the Republicans changed things a couple of years ago, and they're caught in those changes. What did they change? They made the convention earlier, so now it's going to be in July rather than in the fall. They changed the way the last states count delegates. So starting March 15th, the Ides of March, just 2 weeks away, it'll be winner take all. And the winner doesn't need to be a majority winner. You could beat me by 1% and you get all the delegates.
Yeah.
And so whomever is in pole position is very likely to pile up a lot of delegates. Now, I think these last-ditch efforts to recruit Romney, to bring in a brokered convention, all have that feeling of a death rattle, all feel kind of desperation. And I'm not sure at this stage any of them feel like they're going to dissuade Trump, because he's also got a nuclear option, right? His nuclear option is to go independent and thereby handing the whole thing to the Democrats.
But wouldn't the GOP prefer him to go independent, hand the thing to the Democrats just so they could avoid a Trump presidency?
I think it would be an unusual Democrat who would say, effectively, what I'm willing to do is vote against Trump so that I can vote for Hillary Clinton, for example. And while I know there are people who, in the heat of the moment, want to try one last-ditch effort to fling Rubio or somebody else to propel them to the front of the line and to somehow, in a smoky back room, change the order of things. But it's quite another matter to disassemble your party. This happened to the Whigs. The Whigs basically exploded, and that's what created the Republican Party way, way back when. Mm-hmm. I just don't think that's going to happen. I know there are people who are going to try and move heaven and earth to stop Trump, but the basic problem is they're months too late.
Yeah. So say that Trump doesn't get the 1237 delegates to lock up the nomination. Say he's just residing and found himself lingering in the 900 range. What does the GOP do then?
Well, I think that's actually a pretty reasonable question, because I think that's likely to happen, don't you?
Yeah.
I think there's a good chance that the basic problem, right, if you back up for a second, they were running a 7-lane race. And this whole organization was orchestrated not to support a 7-lane race. Now they're down to a 5-lane race. But if Ben Carson isn't going anywhere, and Kasich isn't going anywhere, and Marco Rubio is not going anywhere, it makes it very hard for somebody to get a commanding presence to tilt the axis much. Rubio might be able to unite the independents and the conservatives in the party. He might be. But what it really comes down to is, if Trump has got 900-plus delegates, is the Republican Party willing to commit that kind of change? And I just can't see them doing it. I think they're more apt to just hold their nose and go with it. And by the way, there is the opportunity for people who have underestimated Trump to change. I've seen Washington change so dramatically over the years. And what happens is, once someone starts to look like they're coming into power, mm-hmm. you'll see people who have been very independent and very recalcitrant suddenly slip into line, slip into the stream. And I use no better example, more current example, than Chris Christie. Where was he just weeks ago, and where is he now? Standing squarely behind Trump. I think you're going to see more of that, even if some people just don't buy his act.
And we're talking to author Peter Kiernan. This is Florida Live. I'm Dan Maduri. I'm almost watching not only GOP surrogates and presidential candidates, but also the media basically just in a panic where they just don't know what to do. The media almost self-loathing, where they feel like they have created this Trump monster. The GOP presidential candidates, they almost, to me, I mean, they keep saying over and over again that voters don't know what they're talking about. He is not a conservative. He doesn't represent the conservative movement. Aren't they indirectly insulting the American people and the intelligence there and just their voting base?
Well, let's say this. That I will say this, and not just because of smart people who listen to you. I think it's always a mistake to start your premise by initially saying the voters don't know what they want. The voters, if you look over history, have a remarkable ability time after time after time to purify. Now, if I were going to lay the blame for the creation of the Donald Trump momentum in any single place, and I think your listeners would agree, there's no place that gets more credit for the creation of the Trump phenomenon than the media.
Yeah.
I literally believe that Donald Trump and his team sat together every Sunday night and said, what are we going to do this week to capture center stage? The guy, let's face it, whether you agree with him and you don't agree with him, he's the best I've ever seen at the retail side of politics that requires grabbing the attention, grabbing center stage, even if it comes to not repudiating the KKK. Every week there's another thing that Donald Trump has done to grab center stage. And no one has fed that fire with more fuel, more kindling, more wood than our media. And so now for them to scurry around and say, I'm shocked that there's a problem. I don't know if you ever saw that scene in Casablanca where they say, I'm shocked there's gambling going on.
Yeah.
And then they say to the police, here are your winnings. I have to say that this is a creation of the media. Donald Trump, better than any politician I've ever seen, understands how to work the media, and he's played them like a fiddle.
Mm-hmm. We're talking to author Peter Kiernan. Now, Peter, you've been at the forefront talking about the middle class, and politicians now talking about the middle class. Of course, once they get in office, we don't really see much happening on behalf of the middle class. Frankly, I would like to see the conversation of racial tensions and race in this country subside, and everybody just start aligning themselves from a class perspective than a race perspective, because poverty does not discriminate, and wealth discrepancy is a real issue in this country. What are some of the proposed fixes that you have when it comes to identifying and preserving and maybe even bettering the middle class?
Well, I think there are a few things that we could all do together, and these do not require a Democratic point of view or a Republican point of view. And I'll give you a couple just that pop off the top of my head. But one of the things that everybody agrees upon, for example, is that our infrastructure is crumbling. And in fact, if you go to foreign countries, I spend a lot of time researching my books, going to foreign countries, they all can't believe how we have the world's greatest infrastructure and we're allowing it to decay. And so one of the things, if we all agree on, that we can do is we should commit as a nation right here, right now, to spend $1 trillion. $1 trillion to build our infrastructure. And here's how we do it. I think we should not worry about whether it's Democrat or Republican. We should go out and we should create, and you can be the CEO of it, we should create a national infrastructure development bank. This bank won't make subprime loans. It won't do derivatives. It won't do a lot of things that got us in trouble. It'll do only one thing. It'll support the creation of infrastructure projects of all kinds, and I'll come back to that in a second. But if we did that, we would engage the American people in creating their own infrastructure. We would create more than infrastructure. We would create the kind of jobs that you really like to have for the middle class. And the best part about them is they're multiplier jobs. If you create one job, typically 2 or 3 people have to be hiring in order to make that job come to fruition. But more important than anything else, we would engage the American people in the creation and the recreation, the restoration of our most precious asset, which is our middle class.
Mm-hmm. You know, what's interesting to me, Peter, is just the basic refusal of Washington, D.C. to preserve or invest in America infrastructure. I mean, you would think that potholes would be a bipartisan issue in Washington, D.C. Why can't they even seem to agree on that?
Well, it drives me crazy. I'll give you an example. I'm involved with a charter school and funding a charter school up in the Bronx in New York. Mm-hmm. And this winter, we've had the kids hanging out into the night in front of that school, even on the coldest winter nights. Mm-hmm. So we sent something up there and said, why are all these young people hanging out there? And the answer is, it's the only place they could go in their community to get Wi-Fi.
Wow.
There are all kinds of pipelines we need to be building in addition to the Keystone Pipeline. This approach that I'm talking about, I can come up with a way to fund that infrastructure bank, because one of the things they say in Washington is we have to raise taxes to do it. I say baloney. Here's what we do. We go to every pension fund, every union pension fund, every corporate pension fund, and say, we're going to put your people to work. Now is the time. We want you to put in money into this National Infrastructure Development Bank. The presidency is cloaked in immense power. I think it should go to every hedge fund, every mutual fund, every insurance company, every bank, and say, we want to raise $300 billion. And to do that, we can fund this National Infrastructure Development Bank. So now we've got the equity raise, and I know we could do it. The American people want it, and they would back it. Now, how do we raise the rest? During World War II, we had war bonds, and all Americans from every station in society invested. I say this time we create job bonds. We go to every American, we say, now is the time for all good people to come to the aid of their country. We could raise the money, and we could do it without the interference of Washington. Washington is a spent force. Every game gets played to stalemate. I've talked to lobbyists when we were talking about putting together this National Infrastructure Development Bank. And this is just one idea, but I will tell you something. What they've said is don't bother with the Congress. They can't get anything approved because everything freezes. We're frozen like an almond in a piece of toffee down there.
Wow. So what would be the alternative?
Well, listen, I think we could set up this National Infrastructure Development Bank and just have somebody run it. Just have the president say, okay, I want you three businessmen, because one of the things that happens is you look at how powerful the government can be when it aligns with business. You know, people like FDR, who were not pro-business, nevertheless spoke with great business fluency. There are things we can do to put people back to work. I believe if this president, the sitting president, or any of the 6 or 8 people who are still running for president said, I'm going to make number one the creation of great jobs, and more than that, the filling of great jobs. I'll give you an example. There are 4 million great jobs available in this country today. They don't need the genius of job creation. They just need to be filled. These are skill-based jobs, and some people lack the training necessary to do it. I say we should go out and say to every corporation, we will give you a benefit. Stop saying somebody's got to have a job before you hire them. Stop saying that you only hire people who are trained. Deliberately hire the out-of-work veteran who needs training. Deliberately hire the young person who you know needs to be trained and may need some additional schooling in order to go. Give corporations a tax break for doing that, for doing what we want them to do, and basically urge our society to work together as one. I can think of a time when we did this, Dan. After World War II, we had 16 million men and women coming back from World War II, and they did all kinds of training. They needed all kinds of jobs. And the nation pulled together as one, and that's how we created the middle class. We educated them, we fed them, we housed them. We did all kinds of things to help them get on their feet. As a nation, when we align, amazing things can happen. You're not hearing any of this on the debate side. I don't care how big Donald Trump's hands are. I don't care if Marco Rubio sweats too much or if Ted Cruz didn't get along with his college roommate. These are irrelevant. We have real problems, and none of the people who are running are facing them as far as I can tell.
Mm-hmm. Is that really feasible when we constantly hear this idea of the global marketplace and the shifting economy, and it's no longer here domestically, it's worldwide? Is it really feasible for our country to sit there and say, hey, these jobs are only going to go to Americans?
Here's what I would say. Here's an example, okay? It's a great question. If you look at what we do, in the next 10 years, we will create 1.75 million computer science jobs. No country on earth will create that many computer science jobs. In fact, it's an unbelievable thing because those are wonderful middle-class jobs, and they typically require a couple other people to get hired. If you hire one person from Microsoft, they typically hire 2 or 3 people to work on it. So they're multiplier jobs. So let's talk about those jobs. How are we doing on the talent management side as a nation? You and I are Americans. Your listeners are largely Americans. How are we doing? Well, if you look this year, we're going to graduate about 40,000 computer science majors from the colleges and universities of the country. 40,000. That means over 10 years, we're going to have about 450,000 graduates with these degrees. Sounds to me like we're going to be over 1 million people short. Our problem is not the creation of opportunity. Our problem is a talent management problem. Mm-hmm. We are not facing the needs necessary to create the employees of the future for the jobs of the future. And that's something we can uniquely do. We've done it time after time in this country when someone really focuses on education and says, how do we manage the talent so that when the corporations are creating these great jobs, as we are, we have people who are ready. So we don't have 4 million great jobs that are going unfilled because people aren't ready. That's a talent management issue. No one does that better than we do. We have a great education system. We have a great and willing workforce. We have young people of enormous capacity, and what we can do better than any country is the critical thinking necessary to create and innovate. We have all of the skill sets, all of the basic characteristics. We lack one thing, and the will to do it. And I know the American people want to do it. I know they do.
Very good. Author Peter Kiernan, thank you very much for taking the time, joining us here. Peter, it's always my pleasure.
Enjoy your Super Tuesday.
Great, you too. You too. Peter Kiernan there talking about that. You know, it's interesting. I mean, he's absolutely right. Yes, Trump is a media creation, and yes, America has a talent management problem. Think about that, 4 million unfilled jobs, and instead of sitting there and outsourcing them and looking for ways to bring them in, H-1B visa programs, you saw Disney workers crying based on that. I mean, maybe just what? Just train up the talent here, work with education to train the talent here? That makes what? Too much sense, doesn't it? 866-977-4820. AM 820 News, your conversation station on Super Tuesday.